Hi everyone. I hope you're doing well. Now we're going to do part 2 of repetition structures. So we're actually going to look at nested loops, which is quite involved. So it's going to involve a fair bit of writing out. So you want to get some paper. And we're also going to look at some simple input validation as well. So let's get started. Now, a nested loop, essentially we work with two, is a loop that is inside another loop. Now, the thing that you want to remember about nested loops is that for each iteration of the outside loop, the inside loop must run all of its iterations. So we will look at that in great detail with many different examples. So let's take a look at this first example. This is a nested loop. So we have for minutes in range 60, and then we have another loop inside of that for loop for seconds in range 60, and then we're going to print something. So you can see there's two indentations here for this line indicating that it's inside the innermost loop. So you can go ahead and copy that into a Python program. And we want to go ahead and run that. You can call it, I call mine star.py, which will be clearer later, but you can call it whatever you want. And you'll see here that it prints out this clock that's printing out the minutes and the seconds. And if you scroll all the way up, you can see where it starts. So we want to understand how this works. And I think Python tutor visualize can be quite confusing with nested loops. So the best thing we can do is just get a piece of paper and start writing things out. So let's take this piece of code, take a piece of paper, and this is, again, something I want you to be familiar with for you to know how to step through your iterations for things like this. So this time we're actually got two loops. So we have outer loop, and then this is iteration, kind of long. And then we have this variable minutes, and then we have our inner loop, iteration, and then we have our variable seconds, which you can see here. And then we have something we want to print because we are printing here. Okay, so let me pull this here and then make this smaller so you can see both at the same time. Okay, so we're going to start off with our outer loop iteration 1. Oh, and as we know, minutes is our target variable, and it's going to start at 0 because range always defaults to 0 if we don't have starting variable. Then we immediately go to our inner loop. So inner loop iteration 1, and seconds also starts with 0 because we know that range starts with 0. And then we go to our print. So right now minutes is 0, seconds is 0. So we're going to print 0, colon 0. That's because of the colon there. So far, so good. Now, because of this, what we do with the innermost loop, remember, we have to do all of the iterations of the innermost loop first before we can finish this outer loop. So we're going to say iteration 2, and now it's going to have a value of 1 because we're using range, so that increments by 1 by default. So we say print 0, 1, because minutes is still 0. Then we have inner loop 3, seconds 2, print 0, 2. So you can see this pattern. So we keep going, and then we're going to finish when we get to range 60. Now remember end plus 1, so n plus 1 seconds is going to have the value 59 on the last iteration. So it's going to print 0, 59, and then all of the iterations of the innermost loop will be done at this point. So then we can go back to the outer loop, and we do the second iteration of the outer loop. And then we'll start again with the innermost iteration. So we go 1, seconds is 0. So we say 1, now the minute is 1, and there's 1 second. In a loop 2, seconds is 1, 1, 1. And you can see we're going to continue doing all of the inner iterations until we also get to 60 or 59 for seconds, like this. All right, so there's all these iterations in between, and then we can go back to the next outer loop. And then the outer loop will keep going like this until it also gets to its 59, and then we do all the iterations of the innermost loop. So the last one will be 59, 59. So if you check your printout, you can see that there, right? So that's the first example of a nested for loop, and you definitely please take the time to learn it, go over it, come and ask questions about it. Let me erase this. Okay. Now, I created another example for you. This time it's with lists, just so that you can understand what's going on here. And I also added in some print statements that are inside the outermost for loop, but not inside the innermost for loop. So this print statement here is inside this innermost for loop, but these print statements are in the outer for loop. So let's step through this one and see what's happening here. So let's pull this up in the code. Actually, it's here. So outside.py, and let's run it. Let me put this here next to this one. So this is the output, and don't worry, we will step through it to understand. So we have start of outside loop 1, and then we have inside 1, inside 2, inside 3, end of outside loop 1, and then start of outside 2 loop. So you can see we're stepping through these lists. So remember, each target variable is going to get the value of the next item in the list for every iteration. If you've forgotten how to do lists and for loops, please go back and look at the last lecture where we covered just single for loops with lists to make sure that that's clear for you. Okay, so let's write this one out together. You move this like this. Okay, so again, so outer, I'm going to put outer, this is outer loop iteration to save space. And then our variable is called outside. And then inner loop iteration, and our variable is called inside, which you can see here. And then we have some prints. Okay. So outer loop iteration 1, the value of outside on the first iteration is going to be outside 1. Sorry. Because that is the first item in the list, right? Then we go to this print, start of, and then the variable outside loop. So we're printing this. Then we go to the innermost loop. So inner, the value of inside will be the first value of this list, which is inside 1. And then we're going to print the variable inside, which in this iteration is inside 1. And then we have to do all of the iterations of the innermost loop. So then we do 2. The value is inside 2, and we print inside 2. Then we do 3. The value is inside 3. And then finally, we finish the innermost loop. So then we go to this next line, which is in the outer loop, print end of outside loop. End of, outside is still outside 1. Okay, so if you check the printout in your terminal, we've just done one iteration of the outermost loop so far here. Go back here. So now we're going to go back up to the top of the code and start again with the outer loop iteration 2. So this time it's going to have the value outside 2. And then we have this print statement, start of side 2 loop. And then we go to the innermost loop, and now it's going to be again inside 1 because we start again. It's going to print all of these. And then this will be inside 2, inside 3. And then it's going to be the end. And then we'll have to print end of outside 2 loop. And we just keep going. And we do the third one. And then at the end of that, we do, and the third one, we do all of these. And at the end of that, we print end of outside 3. Oh, excuse me. And then we're done. So please take the time to make sure that that one is clear for you as well. And by all means, you can come to class and ask questions, and we can help you with this. Okay. So let's delete this. Okay. All right. So now I want to show you something a little different. Sorry. So now we're going to look at nested loops. And in this example, we're going to create 10 rows and 5 columns with asterisks or stars. So let's go back to the code here. So this is why it's called star.py. So go ahead and copy this code. Be very careful about your indentations. So make sure that this print is inside this for loop and this print is inside this for loop. And then we're going to run that. And you'll see that it creates 10 rows, and in each row there's 5 stars. So what's happening here? So let's go through, and as always, we're going to go through to understand what's happening with our code. Sorry, I had to pause recording there to cough. Okay, it's very smoky here. Okay, so as always, we do the outer, oops, that's a bit messy. And then our first variable is called row. Then we have inner. Our first variable is called column. And then we have our print. Okay. So we start off in our outer loop, and the value of rho is going to be 0 because we're using range, and we know it defaults to 0. Then we go straight to our innermost loop, and again, column will have value 0 because we know that range defaults to 0. And then we have this print. So remember this end equals empty string. This is really important. So remember, this means that there's no new line, right? So we're printing an asterisk, but there's no new line, okay? Then we have to keep iterating and finish all of the inner loops. So the next time I print an asterisk, it's going to be next to this one here. So this is the new one that I've just printed. And again, there's no new line. So then I do my next one and the next one and the last one. Oops, the last one is, this is going to have the value 4, right? Because it's range 5. So the last one is value 4. So the last star will come to 5 of these stars. And then we finish our innermost loop, one here. Then we can get to this print. Now there's nothing in this print, but remember, print gives you a new line every time you print. So this is actually going to give you a new line, this print here, right? So then we're going to go back up and start in our outermost iteration. And this time rho is going to have the value 1 because we increment it by 1. And then we do all of this again. So all of the inner loop iterations we do again. So this gets repeated here. Right? So then we have another row of 5 asterisks. So we're going to keep doing this until we finish our outer loop. When rho finally has the value 9, because remember it's end plus 1. So that way we will end up with 10 rows of 5 asterisks. So take your time, go through this one. Please come to class and ask questions about anything that's not clear about that one. So then let's go ahead and clear these. Okay. Okay. So now let's look at this slide. This code is very, very similar, but there's one difference. So in the slide above, we had for the innermost loop, it went up to range 5. In this example, it's going to go up to rho plus 1. So this means that this variable from the outer loop is being used in the innermost loop. So they're intrinsically connected. So if we copy that code and run that code here, and we will see that that one difference creates a very different pattern. So now we have a triangular pattern. We start with 1 and we end with 10. So let's actually see how this works, and let's step through step by step and see what's going on here. And let's pull up the code here on the right. Okay, so outer, and then we have row, inner, column, and then we have our print. Okay, so as before, our outermost iteration loop, the value of the target variable is 0 because we're using range, defaults at 0. Then inner, this is where it gets interesting. So, okay, so column is going to be 0, right? because we know that we default to 0. But our range is row plus 1. So let me put just on the right here, row plus 1. So we know that row here is 0. So in this case, it's going to be range 1, right? So we know that we can start at 0, and then we'll end with our 0 plus 1. So we can do 1, right? We can do 1 go. So we can do 1 asterisk here with no new line because we have the end empty string. And then we're going to finish our innermost loop. Then we go to this print, and this is going to give us a new line here. And then we're going to go and start in our outermost iteration here. And then it will take us to our innermost loop again. And then we'll have range 1 again. So we'll have 1 asterisk. But now we can go up one more step because we know this time that it will be range 2 because this time row is 1. So we can actually have, so remember this is, there is no new line here. So I'm going to add the second asterisk. This is the new asterisk that's just been added from this iteration of the innermost loop. It's a bit confusing because this is from this one and then this one is from this one, but there's only been 2 asterisks printed on this innermost loop. This one has printed 1, this one has printed 2. So this is the final print of this one. Okay. Then we go to our next print, and that will give us a new line. And then we go to our outermost loop again, do rows now 2, and we do our innermost. So remember, this time we're going to go up to range 3, so we can go up to 2. Okay? So I'm going to do it this way so it's a bit clearer. So by the time each of these is going to give me 1 asterisk, so by the end of this one, we're going to get 3 in a row, right? Because there's no new lines. So you can see on each outer loop iteration, we're adding 1 more asterisk to a new row. So this is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one, and we're just going to keep doing that until we reach the end. So the outer loop is range 10. So we'll have to stop when row is value 9. So then here in our innermost loop, we're going to start with 1, 0. And remember, if row is value 9, we're going to go up to range 10. So here it will be 10 and this will be 9. So we'll have 10 of these asterisks and the very last one. We'll put times 10 so you get the idea. Okay. So this is probably the most involved one, but if you go through and understand each of these examples step by step, and if there's something that's not clear, and then come and ask questions, then you will be able to get here. So it's really important that you take the time and the effort to understand these. You know, obviously your in-class exercises will be based on these, but more than that, when we come to work with lists, you will also work with nested lists, which actually go hand in hand with nested loops. So this is definitely a trickier thing for students, but it's totally doable if you put in the time to understand. You just have to keep writing it out. It's really helpful to write it out. Okay, so before we move on to input validation, I wanted to show you in class exercise 6, which I actually think is probably just as, if not more, involved than lab 2. So I've given you plenty of time to do this one. So let's have a look. This in-class exercise tests your knowledge of nested loops. So you're going to have to do a nested for loop for each of these questions. So let's have a look at the first one. Write a Python program try_*py that uses nested for loops to draw this pattern that's 10 stars in the top row and 10 columns long. So I refer you to our class before this where we looked at decrementing with for loops. That's my hint. And then number 2, write a Python program try_*py that uses nested loops to draw this pattern. So that's 10 columns long, and the first pair don't have a space between them. And then there's 1 space, and then 2 spaces, and 3 spaces, and so on. Now, this is definitely more tricky, and for this one, you should look at the example I gave with outside.py with this one, because there were some prints in the outermost loop and some prints in the innermost loop. And you're going to have to utilize the prints in the outermost loop and the innermost loop to work on this. So it's like a combination of the different examples we've looked at. So these are definitely involved, and I've given you plenty of time, and it is doable, but you do have to sit down and think. And if you get a result because you guessed, then please take the time to understand how you got there. Because you'll need to know for quizzes and exams. Okay. And then let's look at a little bit of input validation. So input validation is the process of inspecting data that has been input by a user to a program, or not necessarily a user, but in your case, a user, to make sure it is valid before it is used in a computation. So we're introducing it here in the context of loops because it is often done that way. And the loop can keep iterating as long as the inputted data is not valid. So if we have a look here, here's an example. So say we needed to input test scores and they must be between 0 and 100. So say your TA is doing this. And so this line is asking your TA to enter a test score while the score is less than 0 or the score is greater than 100. You can print error, the score cannot be negative or greater than 100. And then you ask for the input again. So you ask for the input inside of the while loop. So that's important. And then if they enter it incorrectly again, then you'll get this message again. And you will keep getting this message until they input a score that's between 0 and 100. And then this will evaluate to false, and then you can carry on to the rest of your code. So that's a little bit on input validation loops. And then just a word on Sentinels. So you will be using Sentinels moving forward. So a Sentinel is a special value of your choosing that marks the end of some kind of sequence of values, of inputs, so forth. So it is useful when asking for input in a loop as a way to end the loop. So for example, if you are asking for input of test scores in a while loop and the user can enter the Sentinel -1 to enter the while loop, you could do something like this. You could say while score is not equal to -1 and then ask for input. And then when the TA, say, wanted to finish inputting, they could type -1, and then this would evaluate to false because it would be equal to -1, and then we would exit out of the while loop. So we have a few questions for you on lab 2 to get you into this a little bit. So this one's not so bad, min-max.py. It's kind of interesting, this one. So this code should take input from the user until the user enters -1. When the user enters a -1, display the minimum value and the maximum value entered by the user up to that point. So this question is a bit more involved than it looks because it's asking you to create a variable and remember the minimum value, like the smallest value that the user has input. And you also need to create a variable and um, remember the biggest value, the maximum value that the user has input. And then at the end of it, you have to output those two things. So this is actually a bit more involved than it looks. It's not just on Sentinels. And it goes without saying that you do not use minimum or maximum built-in functions because we want you to think and use logic. Okay. And then number 2 is create an interactive program, superheroes.py, that displays this menu. So you can just copy this down. And it's asking the user to enter a choice between 1 and 5. So after you get the user's choice, we'd like you to perform input validation to make sure the user entered a valid option between 1 and 5. If the user entered an invalid value, your program should tell the user the value is invalid and then redisplay the menu and ask again for input. You are welcome to use an if statement or a while loop to do this. And then for each valid entry between 1 and 5, ask how many of the action figures the user would like to collect. For example, if the user enters 3, ask how many Batwomen would you like to collect? And then get another input from the user, another number. You don't need to do input validation on the second number. Just add the number to the total for the action figure. So you're going to have to create an accumulator, a total for each one, right? Then redisplay the menu and wait for another menu choice. Let me just change this. There we go, that's better. And then if the user enters 5 to exit the main menu, then just display the names and total number of each of the action figures collected. So you can say like Wonder Woman 1, Thor 0, Batwoman 5, something like that. And so for 5, they're going to exit out. So for that, you want to be thinking about Sentinels, right? Because that's what we're testing. Obviously, don't use break or exit or continue. We just want you to use logic to understand how to do these problems. Okay, so we'll give you more time to do lab 2 as well, don't worry. Well, enjoy. There's a lot there to be getting on with. And you can come to class and ask questions. Don't worry about that. We will help you. And we'll leave it here for now.